Good evening. Hi, everybody. My name is Wesley Farewell. I am with Ratio Christi, that is at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and we wanted to pull Frank Turek in for a tour of Nebraska. So he was at UNK on Monday, UNL on Tuesday, and today he is here at UNO. We're excited. Thanks for coming. I'm excited. I see that you're excited. Without further ado, please welcome Frank Turek.
Good evening. Good evening, Mavericks. Is this working? We had a great crowd in Lincoln. How many were in Lincoln last night or were somewhere else at the time? All right, how many of you are here now? All right, how many don't respond to surveys? I need to know that. I want to go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL. He's operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL colleagues lying in the sniper-prone position next to him. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his colleagues are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's really no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying on the roof will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two Navy SEAL colleagues lying on the roof receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California, just south of Los Angeles, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident that the SEALs wear as their insignia dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, San Diego, California, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour died for his friends. The question is, would anybody die for you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, many people don't think the story's true. They think it's embellished because, after all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things. It's got miracles in it, a resurrection. Who in here has seen a miracle like a resurrection? I haven't. Why would we believe such a thing? Has science somehow disproved miracles? I actually think it's quite easy, however, to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that it's true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yes. Yes, that is actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights. Of course, here in the Central Time Zone, it'd be 8 p.m. on DirecTV channel 378. How many people have DirecTV? Can you show your hands, please? DirecTV. 3 of us. Come on, friends, don't let friends watch cable. If you want to get DirecTV, or if you want to get, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to get DirecTV. Actually, that's not true. We're also on Roku. Who has Roku? All right, Roku's better. Okay. Look for NRB TV on Roku. NRB TV, National Religious Broadcasters. That's where our show airs. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, there's this new technology sweeping Omaha right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, if you go to our website, at that time, you can watch the show streaming live. Also, radio, Saturday morning. I know if you're a college student, you don't get up till the crack of noon, so I know you're not listening to it then, on Saturday certainly, but it's podcasted. You can listen to it anytime you want. It's on our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examine. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. We're going to go through these 4 questions and then get to Q&A. Actually, instead of Q&A, I think tonight we're just going to do all Q, no A. All right? So everyone can ask a question, takes all the pressure off me. All right? Now, we'll go through these 4, and then we'll get to your questions. Why are these the 4 questions, though? Does truth exist? Why is that important? Well, you hear people saying things like, there's no truth, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, look, if there's no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Nothing can be true. In fact, if there's no truth, why would you ever go to college? Aren't you here to learn truth? Isn't that the whole point? We'll deal with that first. Second question, does God exist? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if God doesn't exist. Well, I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that there really is a theistic God. A theistic God is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things and whose every attribute is infinite. We're going to look at 3 arguments for this being. These arguments are mentioned in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're not even going to refer to the Bible when we do point 2. You don't need the Bible to know that God exists. That would be circular anyway. Third question, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. And a lot of people don't believe in miracles today. But I hope to show you that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the data for this miracle. We'll see that tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the documents are reliable enough and other evidence is good enough to let us know if one particular event took place in the ancient world, and that would be the resurrection of Jesus. Because if Jesus really rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because it's not true if Jesus did not rise from the dead. Now, I know some of you are looking at this list going, wait a minute, Frank, time out. What about the Old Testament? Believe the Old Testament's true? Well, look, if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Why? Who's in the New Testament that can authenticate the Old Testament? Jesus, yes. If you're ever in Sunday school, you don't know the answer, just say Jesus, you'll probably be right. It's Jesus, Pastor. That's right. If Jesus really is God, as the New Testament documents claim he is, now I know that's a big if, but if he really is God, whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, so if the New Testament's just reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Now, there's a lot more argumentation that we don't have time to cover. If you want to go further, you can get the book. We ran out of them last night at Lincoln, but you can get it on our website. You can get it on Amazon. You can also get a DVD set called Why I Still Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which goes through all this over 7 hours. There's 12 lessons in it. You can get workbooks, curriculum. A lot of small groups and homeschools use that kind of thing. And then there's another book called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. Last night at Lincoln, we had several atheists asking questions, and I tried to point out to them that whenever they asked a question, they assumed something that would only exist if God existed, yet they're trying to say God doesn't exist. In effect, they have to steal from God in order to say he doesn't exist. They have to sit in God's lap to slap his face. That's what that book is about. Now, I say we don't have the books here, but you can get this entire PowerPoint presentation, and I don't have time to show you all of it. I'll send you all of the slides in a PDF format if you just text the word evidence to 44222. Text the word evidence to 44222. No, not quotes, just evidence, 44222. We'll send you this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form. I'll send you the first chapter, Stealing from God, and some other PowerPoint presentations from my friend J. Warner Wallace, who I'll tell you about a little bit later. All right, but we got to move on. We got to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? All right, good. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't handle the truth." Actually, Mavericks, you know, I have to say, you were better than the wimpy Cornhuskers. But it still really was not exactly right, because he didn't quite say it that way. Here's how he said it. All right, let's try it again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Woo, that's right. Well, you know, there's a lot of this. Baby's amazing, sleeping through all this. There's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. You've heard these claims, right? Well, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, this is going to be the most important thinking skill we're going to talk about. And even if you're an atheist, a Christian, anywhere in between, this is going to be valuable, because this thinking skill is so important that if you understand it and can apply it, you're going to save yourself a lot of pain and suffering with it. Why? Because this thinking skill will help you avoid what is false. And avoiding what is false is half the battle. Because if you start living by false principles, eventually you're going to smack up against reality and it's going to hurt. And I didn't even know this thinking skill until I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree and I didn't know this. To show you what a dimwit I was. I learned this in seminary because they didn't teach me logic until seminary. And this is just a logical principle here. Let me show it to you. The easiest way of showing it to you is to give you an example of using this thinking skill. Suppose someone were to come up to you and say there is no truth, which is a common claim, a relativistic claim, a postmodern claim. What would you say to somebody who says there is no truth? You should ask this person a question. What should the question be? Yes, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because this is a self-defeating statement. A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. It violates its own standard, and so it can't be true. What's a self-defeating statement? In addition to saying there's no truth, a self-defeating statement would be, I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, what would you say? You just used English to say it. Or it'd be like me saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child, right? These are self-defeating statements. And once you get good at recognizing self-defeating statements, you're going to save yourself a lot of pain and suffering, and you're going to be able to discover the truth. And if Jesus is right, that the truth will set you free, this is important, right? So, here's the thinking skill. Turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. Somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself, and you say, is that? All right, let's do a few more of these. Suppose someone says all truth is relative. If they say that, you're going to say, is that a relative truth? No, that's an absolute truth. You're claiming it's absolutely true, all truth is relative. That's like saying I can't speak a word in English. How about if somebody says there are no absolutes? Again, turn the claim on itself. What question would you ask back? Is that an absolute? Or you might say, are you absolutely sure? How about if somebody says you can't know anything? How do you know that you can't know, right? How about if somebody says, you probably have heard this too, all truth comes from science. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask back? Is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. You can't prove that in the laboratory. In fact, the most important things in life have nothing to do with science. Honey, do you love me? I don't know. Let's run an experiment. No. In fact, you couldn't know anything in science without philosophy. There's a chapter in the book Stealing from God. The chapter's on science. The title of the chapter is Science Doesn't Say Anything. Scientists do. Science doesn't say a word. It's scientists that say things. Why? Because all data needs to be gathered. All data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that in the mind. You can't do science without philosophy. You can't read the Bible without philosophy. Philosophy is the ground of everything you do, whether you know it or not. In fact, when you get a PhD here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, what does the PH stand for? Philosophy. Philosophy of biology, philosophy of physics, philosophy of history, whatever it is. You can't do science without philosophy. How about this? You probably heard this claim. You should doubt everything. Should we doubt that? Why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice they don't doubt that? Now, by the way, how many people in here, whether you're Christian, atheist, anywhere in between, how many people in here sometimes doubt that what you believe is true? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're probably not thinking very much. I've written books on this stuff, and sometimes I wake up and I go, I don't even know if this is true. You ever do that? But when I start thinking about my doubts, I realize that most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. In other words, the evidence is really good. What's changing is me. Good day, everything's fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day. What's changing, me or the evidence? Me, I'm going up and down. You know, sometimes I'll see people at events like this, or they'll email me and they'll say, Frank, you know, I used to be a Christian, but I've lost my faith. Now, I don't mean to be unkind, but since I'm originally from New Jersey, sometimes I am. And when they say that, I want to say this to them. So? Because your psychology changed, God has somehow popped out of existence? Because your psychology changed, Jesus hasn't risen from the dead? How does that follow? You know, your psychology will not tell you whether something's true or false. The evidence will. Don't dwell on your psychology. You could have bad psychology today because you had bad pizza earlier today, right? I mean, your psychology and emotional state may fluctuate, but the facts don't. If you say focus on the facts will tell you whether something's true or not. It's not just about Christianity, it's about anything. And I think if you really focus on the facts, you'll realize that Christianity really is true. And if you start doubting your doubts, then you're back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? I doubt it. How about this? You hear this a lot too. You ought not judge. What are you going to say? Yeah, why are you judging me for judging then? You see, it's a judgment to say you ought not judge. You go, wait a minute, Frank, time out. Didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. I know this is going to sound a little strange, but it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew's writing the Gospel of Matthew, he goes, okay, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No, when were the chapter and verse divisions put in there? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is important because it's a really long series of books. You can get lost in there, right? The problem is we tend to think that if it has a number in front of it, you can just take it out of context and make it say whatever it wants. If someone ever comes up to you and says, I got a verse for you, you got to go, time out. Let's read around that verse and see what it really means. Okay? Because Jesus didn't just say, judge not. What did he say right after that? Judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. In fact, Jesus in John 7:24 says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You have to make judgments. Everybody makes judgments. In fact, it would be ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Because it's a judgment itself. And number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments just getting over here tonight. And now you're wondering, was it the right judgment? This guy's crazy. Atheists make judgments. What judgments do they make? Well, there's no God. Bible's not true. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. There is no objective moral values anywhere. There are no objective moral values. There's no ultimate meaning to life. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, however. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? Yes, they were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Some of them were on the Sanhedrin, to whom the Romans delegated authority. They were lawmakers for Israel. They were politicians. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet Jesus did this? Yes. In John chapter 8, he's talking to these same Pharisees. He's having a bit of an argument with them. He gets the point in the conversation where he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop and you say, your father is the devil. By the way, never say that to a sibling. Jesus said that. And then in Matthew 23, the same Pharisees he's going after again. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you brood of vipers, you snakes. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and father, mother and daughter, father and son. I mean, he was not Mr. Rogers. He didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter E. No, Jesus was tough. In fact, why do you think they killed him? Do you think Jesus was killed for skipping around saying, love your neighbor? Does that get you killed? Love your neighbor? You must die! No. Why was he killed? He was killed, number one, for claiming to be God. That's blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And number two, he spoke truth to power, particularly the temple authorities who were about to be put out of business by him, and they didn't like it. In fact, if you look at John chapter 11, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, at the end of that chapter, Caiaphas, who either witnessed this personally or had associates who witnessed it, said, it's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish. They had evidence he was the Messiah, and they didn't like it, so they decided to kill him. You know, people say, why doesn't Jesus come back right now? Well, he will come back ultimately with force. But why doesn't he come back right now like he did before? Because we'd probably kill him again. So don't buy into this idea that Jesus was a 60s flower child. Read the text for yourself. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. Do you ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, I really love you, you're such a wonderful person, I wish I could be like you. You think your friend's going to say, you ought not judge. No, your friend's never going to say that. Why? Because I've noticed that people really don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset with you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. In fact, I submit to you that probably everybody in this room in the past week or two has barked at somebody you love because they told you the truth. It may have been coming over here tonight because we don't like our evil deeds exposed. And Jesus exposed a lot of evil deeds. But don't buy into this idea you can't make judgments. You have to make judgments. You have to make judgments without being judgmental. Somebody put it this way: evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. We're no better than anybody else without Jesus. None of us are making it anywhere without Jesus. He's our sacrifice. All right, we could talk a lot more about self-defeating statements. We don't have time. I just want to hammer this point home by asking you this question. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? This statement shoots itself, so does all truth is relative. There are no absolutes. You ought not judge. They're all self-defeating. They can't be true. So if our reasoning is good at this point, truth does exist. Now, what does that say about relativism and postmodernism, which say there is no truth or there's no grand truth? They're false because they're claiming it's true that there's no truth. Now, by the way, college students, if you ever have a professor say there's no truth, you may want to ask them, is that true? But you also may want to stand up and say, I want my money back. Right? Why would you be here if you're not here to learn truth? You don't get degrees in opinions. You get degrees in truth. Of course there's truth. The only question now is it true that God exists? And that's the next point. But before we get there, I need to point out one thing. Sometimes during the Q&A, we have a Q&A mic set up here. We'll get to it a little bit later. If an atheist gets up to the Q&A mic, and if you're an atheist, you're welcome here. Thank you for being here. But I want to give you a heads up because it's not fair for me to ask you a question without giving you a heads up. You're supposed to ask me questions. I'm not supposed to ask you. So let me give you a heads up. If you get up to that microphone, I may ask you this question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people. I ask, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And they say, no. Just happened at Purdue a couple weeks ago. No. Wait, you claim to be reasonable and rational. How is it reasonable and rational to not believe something that's true? It's not. The problem in this case isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God because they want to be God of their own lives. In fact, many of us are not on a truth quest. We're on a happiness quest. We're just going to believe whatever we think is going to make us happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun but ultimately destructive things, yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here who's over 40 knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. Yeah, I'm going to do it my way. Yeah, gee, that didn't work out. The only way to get true contentment and happiness is to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. So I just want to let you know, I may ask you that question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? So truth does exist. The next question, however, is it true that God exists? And I mentioned, and by the way, we're going to spend the majority of our time in point 2. It's such a big point. But I mentioned 3 arguments that we're going to talk about for the existence of God. The first is the argument from the beginning of the universe known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, there must be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have scientific evidence behind them. We'll see some of that a little bit later. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. Yet it probably is the most relevant argument to most people. And it's also the argument you've known since you were a very small child, and it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torture's opinion. That's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Everyone knows those issues aren't just a matter of opinion. If that's the case, there must be a standard beyond humanity, a standard of goodness, righteousness, and justice, and any deviation from that standard would be what we would call evil. But we're not going to deal with that now. We're going to start right here at the cosmological argument. Now, you guys have to admit, it was worth coming out here tonight just to see God move like that. I mean, come on, did you see? People say they've never seen God move. Oh, yeah? Watch that right there. I mean, come on. Took hours to do that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big Now, I know some of you are going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists have admitted it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 2 years ago, put it this way. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data. What's the data? That space, time, and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing. No, it wasn't a quantum vacuum. It was nothing. What's nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. Now, it wasn't just Hawking who said this. Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist who describes himself as an agnostic, put it this way. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, and by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? It's someone who studies the origin of the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there are two words in here I want to highlight. The first word is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science is tentative. But Vilenkin has seen so much evidence crisscross or converge on one point, and that point is that the universe had a beginning, that he is constituting it as a proof. Also, the other word is the word problem. Why is it a problem if the entire space-time continuum had a beginning? Because it would seem to mean that whatever caused space, matter, and time can't be made of space, matter, and time. In other words, you can't find a cause for nature in nature. You can't have a natural cause of all of nature. It must be something beyond nature. Use more reasonable. No one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing. What do you think? Number two, I was at Texas A&M. Had to be 10 years ago now. Aggie mating call. And an atheist at Texas A&M said, oh, I think number 1 is more reasonable. I said, time out. Let's look at number 2 first. Number 2 says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number 1 is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, I said to the audience that night at Texas A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. And by the way, the law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. Either it's the universe or something outside the universe. But since you can't create yourself, there's got to be an uncaused first cause, a self-existing being. Anyway, I said to the folks at A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently pooping on your pillow. Right? You don't worry about that. You're not worried that a black mamba snake is going to appear out of nothing right under your seat and bite you right now. Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. And atheists yet are suggesting this. Do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in at least the miracle that someone created something out of nothing. Atheists believe in the miracle that no one created something out of nothing. Which takes more faith? Yeah, I think so. In fact, if things can pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause, I mean, if the whole universe could do so, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? You wake up one morning, your Hyundai is a Tesla. And you go, how do I charge this thing? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Could have saved me $4,000. If you're hungry after this and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your room, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? No, I submit to you it's the atheists that have all the faith. In fact, here's a question I ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? This is the question that Leibniz, a philosopher 200 or 300 years ago, put forth and said, why does anything exist if there's no God? Now think about this. If space-time and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing, and that's where all the evidence points, whatever created space-time and matter can't be made of space-time and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. Impersonal forces don't make choices. So it had to be personal. The being would also have to be intelligent in order to be able to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, how do you know it's the Christian God? We don't. Yet. We haven't done enough research yet. No argument gets you all the way to the Christian God. We got to see who Jesus is at this point. All we know is this could be the Christian God. It could also be Allah or some other theistic God. What seems to be false at this point is atheism or naturalism. We got to keep doing the research, and when we do, I think if you look at the evidence, I think you'll discover that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,987 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. But we haven't gotten there yet. We got to go on now to the next argument, the teleological argument. And I mentioned earlier that there's two aspects to this. The universe appears designed, and so do you. Let's start with the universe. And this deals with the fine-tuning of the universe. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is so fine-tuned that if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe, virtually imperceptibly, there'd be no universe, or there would be no universe that could support life. This includes the initial conditions of the universe and the current conditions of the universe. Let's look at the initial conditions first. Stephen Hawking. We're just going to look at a couple of these. There's at least a dozen or so of these values that if you change any one of them, we're not here. Here's what Hawking said about the expansion rate of the universe. He said if it were different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If you were to change the expansion rate, that infinitesimal amount from the very beginning, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary kind of argument for this or explanation. Why? Because the expansion rate did not evolve to that point. The expansion rate started there. That's the initial condition of the universe, one of the initial conditions. Seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be for us to be sitting here today. Slightly different either way, we're not here. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 in 10 to the 40th power, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. You can't get that tape measure at Lowe's, okay? Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches, but this is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If the strength of gravity were different by 1 inch in either direction across the scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. I don't have enough faith to believe that that value just somehow landed there by chance. And oh, by the way, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. No, chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. When scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. Look, there's only 2 possible explanations for that value. Either that value was designed or it wasn't. What's more reasonable? It was designed. And if it wasn't designed, we wouldn't be here. Now, as I say, there are many more of these. We don't have time. But you could also make the argument that in addition to these factors, our solar system is designed with us in mind. Let's take a look at the solar system here for a second. There we are right there, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away from the sun, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is... That's a lie. It's too cold here in Nebraska. I live in Charlotte. It was 63 today. What am I doing here? Anyway, the axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter right here was not in its current orbit, we couldn't survive here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Yes, Jupiter's gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you see these dark plumes? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Same thing is true with Saturn. In fact, you want to see the size of the planets? Check this out. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus. Where's Arcturus now? That's Arcturus. Here's Antares over here. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here. Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And this is in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius. You go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our young sons, out to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get to go there, it's on the south side of Tucson, far from the city lights. And on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there one night. This was like 20, 25 years ago. And the guide says, wow, so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we'll see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on. We're not going to see the space shuttle in orbit. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking out of the western desert sky relative to us about like this. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was still in the range of the sun, and when we got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be here. 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and try and go to the next nearest star or the star an average distance away? If we could go 5 miles a second, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles? How long do you think it would take us? Too long. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy an average distance away, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. The prophet Isaiah, writing in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 25, says that God says this, "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One." In other words, you want a comparison? You want to know what God is like? Here's what God says. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and named them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. You want to know what God is like? Look to the heavens. What do you see when you look to the heavens? The Hubble Space Telescope has helped us peer further and further into the heavens. And a number of years ago, they trained Hubble on 1/24 millionth of the sky. How much is that? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up at arm's length. That piece of rice represents about 1/24 millionth of the sky. What did Hubble find? This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. What did they find? I'm going to show you what they found. I don't know if you can see this, but on the bottom of this image are mountains. This is the southern hemisphere. From the southern hemisphere. I'm going to start a video. It's actually a series of pictures put together from Hubble. And what you're going to see when this starts is you're going to see the constellations of the southern hemisphere come up, and then Hubble is going to zoom in on 1/24 millionth of the sky. There is no audio. It's just video. Are you ready? Here we go. There are the constellations. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/24 millionth of the sky. How many stars are out there? There are more stars out there than there are grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. Psalm 103 verse 11 says, God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth. How high are the heavens above the earth? Stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. Over 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. Infinite. That's the point. Ladies and gentlemen, is it possible that the being that created and sustains all those stars and the being that created and sustains you might have a reason for some difficulty you're going through now, even if you don't know what that reason is? But as amazing as the heavens are, you're actually more amazing. The heavens aren't made in the image of God, but you are. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? It doesn't mean you look like God because he's an immaterial being. It means you're a person like God. You have mind, emotion, and will. You know, you feel, you want. You can do things like God. You can create like God. In fact, he put you on here to be his imager, to be his ambassador, to represent him. This is why the Apostle Paul comes along and says he makes his appeal through you. You're a representative of God here on earth. And you started here in the womb. This is you at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limping here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter software program we call your genome that makes you you. All the letters were in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.2 billion letter software program we call your genome that makes you you. all the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. Do you know you have not received any more genetic information from this point until right now? Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, time out. You can't legislate morality. All right, newsflash, ladies and gentlemen, no extra charge for this. This was actually the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law which doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people come to me and they say, don't impose your morality on me, I go, why not? Would that be immoral? Because, you're doing that to me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, but you're imposing an ought not on me right now. Actually, the better answer to the objection, don't impose your morality on me, is this. This isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men. And the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This is not my morality. This is not your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts, Romans chapter 2. So if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator on whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point until right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second, for most anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another, knock it off. How do you know how to do that? Are you thinking about this? Are you going, time out, Frank, hold on, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No. This is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle noticed something about 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature was going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree? Or a birch tree, or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Yeah, but who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No, but it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward that end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and said, this is going to be my 5th way to argue for God. All of nature's going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be a director. Now notice, this is not an argument about the Big Bang way back when. This is an argument that says every single second of existence requires a mind and power like God to keep everything going the way it goes. This is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, why we can do science and why I argue in order to do science you need God. Because if we didn't have reliable cause and effect, if we didn't have reliable natural laws that continue to do the same thing over and over again, we couldn't do science. And it seems like there's a mind behind all of this that sustains what goes on. That's why the Apostle Paul comes along and says, in Jesus we live and move and have our being. And Jesus holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says that God sustains all things by his powerful word. So God just didn't create the universe and then he left it. God creates the universe and he sustains it, including all the natural forces, and you every single second. Now, there's a lot more in the Stealing from God book on that, but we got to move on. You might be thinking, Frank, don't atheists have answers to this? No. In fact, materialistic atheists don't even have arguments that any of us should trust. Why? I can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to quote Lewis. Here's what Lewis said regarding how atheism makes reason impossible. Now, this is a 2-slide quote. You got to track with him on this. You ready? Here we go. Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? You with him so far? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. I can't improve upon Lewis, but he's absolutely right. And in the chapter on reason and stealing from God, this is what I say in a chapter. Lewis says it in like 8 words, okay? But that's exactly the point. If materialism's true, you're nothing but a moist robot. And you shouldn't believe anything you think, because you're just dancing to your DNA, as Richard Dawkins would say. You're just completely driven by the laws of physics. So why should you think anything you think about anything is true? Now, we could talk more about that, but we got to move on to our final argument, the moral argument. Let's suppose you go out on a hike somewhere and you get way out in the woods and you get lost. It's getting dark, your cell phone's dead, you're turned around. You know the direction from which you came, but you can't find it right now. You know you got to go north to get home. All you have to get you home is a magnetic compass. So you take out your magnetic compass, and you know a magnetic compass is always supposed to point to north, but you take out your compass, and your compass, no matter which way you turn, always points to you. How helpful would that compass be? It's not helpful at all. You know where you are. You're trying to figure out where north is. Well, question, ladies and gentlemen. Why do we think that if the compass of life doesn't point to us, in other words, if things aren't going just our way, either God doesn't exist, he's evil, or he's forgotten about us? Why do we think that? Do you realize that whether or not God exists, you are not the center of the universe, and neither am I? Yet we think that way, don't we? Everything's got to go my way. Compass has to point to me. And by the way, is there a moral compass? In other words, is there a right way you ought to live? Or can you just live any way you want? Let me ask the question a different way. Do we discover right and wrong, or do we determine right and wrong? This is the interactive portion of the program. We discover right and wrong, but our culture says, oh, no. You determine what's right for you, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You determine what's right for you. 4 years ago this month, I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota at a church. I spent several days there. We had going through this I don't have enough faith to be an atheist material in a lot more detail than what we can do here tonight. And the second night I was there, we had the microphone set up for the Q&A, and a couple of young men in their 20s got down to the microphone, and they were atheists. I didn't think anything of it. We just had a nice exchange at the microphone. The next night, we had the microphone set up again. About a 50-year-old man got up to the microphone, and he had a question written on 2 sheets of paper. And he began to read the question. 10 seconds into reading the question, he broke down crying. He couldn't go any further. So I walked off the platform, I went down to him, and he just handed me the 2 sheets of paper, and all he said was, read it, read it. So I began to read it. I'm trying to digest this 2-page question. By the time I got back up to the platform, I realized that that man, whose name turned out to be Steve, was upset for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, Steve had recently learned that a supposed friend of his, also about a 50-year-old man by the name of Tom, had been sexually abusing Steve's daughter from the time she was age 4 to the time she was age 14. Right in his own home, under his nose, never saw it. The second reason Steve was upset was because the two young men who were there the night before, the 20-year-olds, the atheists, were his sons, who used to be Christians and are now atheists. Because as soon as they heard about what happened to their sister, they said, there can't be a good God. A good God wouldn't have allowed this to our sister, wouldn't have allowed this to happen to our sister. There is no God. In fact, one of them was going to a Roman Catholic seminary to become a priest, and as soon as he heard the news, he walked out of the seminary and he said, that's it, there is no God. I'm done with God. So I said, Steve, it's okay to be mad at God. In fact, some of the Bible writers are mad at God. Read Habakkuk. Read Lamentations. Read some of the Psalms. God, where are you? You know, God can take your anger. And by the way, do you realize that you can curse God all day and you're not going to hurt him? He's an infinite being. How are you going to hurt him? You can praise him all day and you're not going to help him. He's an infinite being. How are you going to help him? You say, well, why does God want us to praise him and not curse him then? Because he wants what's best for us. Who gets the benefit of praise and the detriment of cursing? We do. He doesn't need our praise. He's self-sufficient in the Trinity. He doesn't need us. We need him. So I said it's okay to be mad at God temporarily. This is not a good long-term strategy. But also, Steve, this actually does not disprove God. It actually shows God does exist. And I said, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, what that 50-year-old man did to your sister wasn't really wrong. It's just your opinion. Because if there is no true compass, how can you say he had the wrong compass? I mean, where did his compass point? It pointed to him. If there is no true compass, you can't say he has the wrong compass. You say, well, how does this show God does exist? Because this wouldn't even be evil unless there was good. You see, because evil doesn't exist unless good exists, but good doesn't exist in an objective way unless God exists. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, because evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil does not exist on its own. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, what do you got? You got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? What do you got? Nothing. What if you take all the rust out of a car? You got a better car, but if you take all the car out of the rust, you just got a rust spot on the pavement. There's nothing there. In other words, evil doesn't exist on its own. It only exists as a lack in a good thing. So if you're going to say something's evil, you're presupposing something's good, which means you're presupposing God. And C.S. Lewis realized this. He, early on in his life, was an atheist because he thought there was too much evil in the world, too much injustice in the world. Then one day he had an epiphany, and he wrote it ultimately in Mere Christianity. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? See, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if you're suggesting there's evil out there, and everyone in this room knows there is evil, you've got an argument for God. Now, you might ask the question, why would God allow evil to continue? That's another question. We can deal with it during the Q&A, or it's in the books. But you can't say God doesn't exist because nothing would be evil unless he did exist, because he's the standard of good by which we'd even know what evil was. So evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. Now, the man who did this, Tom, everybody knows he's guilty, but he's not in jail. Why? Because every time the trial comes up, Jessica, the one who was abused, psychologically checks out. She can't testify against him. If she doesn't testify against him, he doesn't go to jail. So I said, Steve, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, then the man who did this to your sister will never get justice. He's not going to get justice here on earth if she doesn't testify, and he's not going to get justice in the afterlife because according to atheism, there is no afterlife. Do you really think that's the way the universe is? Do you really think there's no such thing as justice? The very reason you're upset, rightfully so, is because you know a great injustice has been done, but there can't be injustice unless there's... And the only being that can ensure justice is an all-knowing, all-powerful being who can right wrongs in the afterlife because they're not always righted here. We know that. So atheism doesn't take away the pain. Atheism only takes away the hope. Now Jessica, the one who was abused, once she hit 18, decided she was going to do something positive with this awful experience. She actually wrote a book. Here it is. Not Your Princess by Jessica Mitchell. I read one chapter of this book. I couldn't read any more. You can get this on Amazon right now. Now, why am I telling you this? Because her father, Steve, wants people to know that this happens too often in American households. Adults, if a young person ever comes to you and says, Uncle Joe did this to me, do not dismiss it. Oh, Uncle Joe would never do that. How do you know? Jessica now gets emails from other kids going through the same thing. She can hardly deal with it herself. In fact, last time I talked to Steve about 1.5 years ago, I asked how Jessica was. Jessica is still in a treatment program in San Diego, California at $15,000 per month. She has multiple personalities, which is common with this kind of abuse. You know, our culture tells us that sex is just physical. That's a lie. If sex is just physical, why is Jessica still in a treatment program at $15,000 a month? If sex is just physical, why is it worse if somebody rapes you than if somebody just physically assaults you? If sex is just physical, why is it if your spouse goes out and has sex with somebody else, you don't go, oh, that's just physical, because you know it's not. There's so much more to sex than the physical. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual, it's moral. You have sex with someone, everything changes forever. Sex is like fire. You put it in your fireplace, it's wonderful. It'll warm you. You get it anywhere else in your house, it will burn your house down. Maybe not immediately, but over the long term it will. And again, everyone in here who's over 40 knows what I'm talking about, because many of us have tried it ourselves. It's the most wonderful thing in the world, yet also, therefore, the most dangerous if not used properly. The bottom line to all this is that God's nature is morality's true north. Any deviation from that nature is what we'd call evil. If that nature doesn't exist, nothing is evil, yet everyone in this room knows certain things that are evil. So what can we conclude from these three arguments? From the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, we can see that we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. These are the attributes of the God of the Bible, and we still haven't opened the Bible yet. Well, how do we know it's the God of the Bible? How do we know this isn't some other theistic God? For that, we got to go to the next question, and that is, are miracles possible? And you're probably wondering, Frank, man, this is taking a long time. When are you going to be done? The next 2 points actually go relatively quickly. I said that 2 is going to take the longest period of time, but number 3 is easy, although a lot of people don't think it's easy. Why? Why are miracles important? Because God can use miracles to tell us who to listen to. Why listen to Moses? Because Moses can do miracles. Why listen to Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. In other words, the miracles are signs from God. Listen to this person. The problem is a lot of people today think miracles are impossible, like Noah and the ark. All right. Christians, can we just agree on one thing? Let's just keep this in the room for tonight. I know it's being streamed, but let's just keep this in the room. Christians, can we all just agree on one thing? That Noah and the ark is crazy. Can we agree? It's crazy. Also, the resurrection. How many in here have seen someone rise from the dead? Yeah, neither have I. None of us have seen it. Yet the entire Christian faith is dependent on us believing something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? And then the big problem miracle in the Bible for some reason is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? What does it deal with Jonah? Can you really believe that? Is that really true? Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? Yeah, the greatest miracle of the Bible is not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is, I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is Genesis 1:1, the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? Here's the interesting point. Even the atheists are admitting the data for this verse. Again, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? If space, matter, and time had a beginning, it's got to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, as we've already seen. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, is it possible these other verses are true? Of course it is. If God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside the universe? Sure. Can he do the Noah miracle? Of course it's crazy, unless God exists. It's supposed to be crazy without God. You can't do this without God. Of course resurrections don't occur unless God exists. You can't explain it any other way. Same thing is true with Jonah. In fact, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, Frank, you just said something I don't agree with. You said God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. Can't God do anything? No, there's some things even God can't do. Like what? He can't do logically impossible things. Like he can't create a married bachelor. I know some guys try, but no. He can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create a five-sided triangle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. I mean, there are some things that are just too hard for God. In fact, you can do some things that God can't do. What can you do that he can't do? Lie. If he's going to lie, he's not the standard of truth. Change. What's he going to change from? He's already a perfect being. Any change would necessitate a move from perfection to imperfection. No, if he could do those things, he wouldn't be the standard. It would make him weaker. Now, a lot of people don't believe things because, like a miracle, because they've never seen one. I submit to you that is not necessarily a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them right now. You believe in love. Have you ever seen love? Oh, you may have been loved, you may have loved, but you've never seen love. It's not a physical thing. In fact, about 10 years ago, I had 2 debates with Christopher Hitchens. You guys know who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And in our second debate, you can see these debates on our YouTube channel, crossexamine.org. A student asked Christopher this question: Christopher, what is love? And Christopher, being a materialist, had to give a materialist answer. So he said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Well, I got the chemical today. Tomorrow I might not have the chemical. Love is not a chemical. Love is an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God that we can share. It's immaterial. You don't see it. Same thing is true with justice. It's immaterial. You don't see it. You've never seen gravity. Frank, come on. We're looking at it right now. Nope, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. You know, we really don't even know what gravity is. But you're seeing the effects of gravity. And that's how we know God exists. We reason from effect back to cause. We see a creation, that's the effect. We reason back to a cause, a creator. We see design in the universe, that's the effect. We reason back to a cause, a designer. We have a moral law written on our hearts, that's the effect. We reason back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. We reason from effect to cause. That's how we know God exists. This is what scientists do. They find effects and they try and figure out what caused the effect. In fact, you've never seen George Washington. Yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by the cause known as George Washington. The same thing is true with Jesus. He's left effects behind that are best explained by the person called Jesus of Nazareth. So you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. And by the way, if miracles do occur, you shouldn't expect to see many, if any of them. In fact, let me say this, a little caveat here. Do you realize there does not need to be a miracle since Jesus and the apostles for Christianity to be true? You don't need modern day miracles to show that Christianity is true. Now, I believe modern day miracles do occur. In fact, my friend Craig Keener at Asbury Seminary has written a hernia-inducing 2-volume set called Miracles, where he investigates modern day miracle claims, and if just one of them are true, miracles occur, right? But you don't need them. But if miracles occurred all the time, then they wouldn't get our attention as special acts of God. So if miracles do occur, they have to be extremely rare. I mean, why? Well, imagine if resurrections occurred all the time. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead for your sins. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get our attention. If it's a regular event, then it wouldn't get our attention. So miracles have to be rare, extremely rare. By the way, one other point on atheism. For atheistic naturalism to be true, every single spiritual experience and miracle claim in the history of the universe has to be false. Is that possible? It's possible. Is it reasonable? No. You have to have a lot of faith to be an atheist. Finally, we're going to go to the key question now. We know that truth exists. We know that God exists. We know that miracles are possible. Now we want to see if the New Testament is true on one particular point. We don't need to prove the whole New Testament. We don't have to have an inerrant book or any of that. We just have to see if one event from the ancient world took place, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. Did he really rise from the dead? Because if he did, everything follows from that. Now, there's a lot of evidence he did. I don't have time to go through it all. I'm just going to list it here. It all begins with the letter E. We're going to look at 2 of them out of the 8 I'm going to show you, okay? First of all, we have early sources. The New Testament documents are written early, and the data within the documents come from even earlier sources. Secondly, there are eyewitness details throughout the text. Just see chapter 10 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. There's embarrassing stories in there they wouldn't have made up. I'll explain that and excruciating deaths in a minute. Those are the 2 we're going to look at. Also, there's embedded confirmation. I don't have time to explain this, but if you're interested in this, and you should be because this is a very interesting point, I just need you to Google 2 words. Google undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences. This is the best evidence you've probably never heard of that the New Testament writers are all independently witnessing the same historical events. Also, expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. If I had only one Old Testament prophecy to make my case on, it would be Isaiah chapter 53. There's extra biblical writers, 10 ancient non-Christian sources within 150 years of Jesus' life. People like household names like Josephus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon. They mention Jesus and the apostles, and when you put their story or their brief mentions together, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. And finally, number 8, the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem. It's very difficult to explain how Christianity could come out of Judaism in Jerusalem if Jesus' body was in the tomb. Why? Who could have stopped Christianity by taking his body out? The Jews and the Romans, and they wanted it to be stopped. They couldn't do it. Why? Because Jesus was still using his body. Real hard to explain how it could come out of Jerusalem unless the tomb was empty. All right, as I said, we don't have time to cover all these. Let's cover embarrassing stories briefly. There's a principle that historians use when they're trying to discover if some writer is telling the truth in an historical document. It goes like this. If there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why do you think it would be true? Because you're not going to invent details that embarrass you. You might invent details that make you look good, but not details that embarrass you, right? In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? Now, you don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing details or stories that they never would have invented because it makes them look bad. For example, I'll just give you a few of these. In fact, this is why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Peter, their leader, the leader of the apostles, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down at one point, said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And at the crucifixion, all the disciples, with the exception of maybe one, are cowards. They all run away. It's like a Monty Python movie. Run away. They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? If I was there, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write something down like this. Let's see. We marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. That sounds pretty good. What do you think? Yep, that's good. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the embarrassment to men. That was, set that aside. Independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses. In fact, one of them was a demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a great witness. You know? What's this telling us? If all 4 Gospels are telling us this, it's true. They're not making it up. I actually had a woman come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? Right? He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. You know, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, this is the Great Commission. Jesus has his disciples up on the hill, and he's given them the Great Commission. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers, right? There's a difference. And as he's there giving them the Great Commission, right there in verse 17, it says of his disciples, some believed, but some doubted. He's standing resurrected right in front of them. And they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. No, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. The Romans killed him. Jesus is dead. No, it's him. Look, the Romans know how to kill people. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. In Mark chapter 3, his own family wants to seize him and take him home because they think Jesus is out of his mind. Now, you may have heard the scholars say the New Testament writers embellish Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there, which is almost universally recognized to be the earliest gospel? That's embarrassing. Also, his own brothers don't believe in him. That's embarrassing as well. John 7:5, his own brothers didn't believe in him. We learned later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, you guys are sharp tonight. James dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem in 62 AD. He's thrown off the Temple Mount and then stoned to death by the Sanhedrin. Who tells us this? Not the New Testament. Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was probably in Jerusalem at the time because he lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD, and Hegesippus, another writer who lived later. They tell us what happened to James. Now, why would James die as a martyr for his brother's new religion when he didn't even believe his own brother when he walked the earth? Paul tells us. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8 is the earliest evidence for the resurrection in the entire Bible. It's a creed. In other words, this was memorized orally before Paul wrote it down in 1 Corinthians in 55 AD. And this creed tells who Jesus appeared to after he was resurrected. One of the people he appeared to was James. So before the resurrection, James said, yo, bro, you're not God. After the resurrection, James said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? How many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah. You don't believe in him either, do you? Neither did James until he saw the resurrected Christ. Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? They're calling the Lord demon-possessed. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew and Luke, when they were putting the genealogies together, said, you know what, I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. Let's see, Rahab. No, this is embarrassing. There's a lot of embarrassing people in the Jewish Messiah's bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew, not a good guy. Read about him. It's like Genesis 37, 38, somewhere in there. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us, huh? Bathsheba is in there. Do you know that Matthew, in his genealogy, won't even mention Bathsheba's name? What does he say when he gets to her? Uriah's wife. Ooh. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Why? Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. Look, this is embarrassing. You don't find this in other literature. Other histories hide the embarrassing stuff. The Bible just tells it like it is. It's the ultimate no-spin zone. There's a lot more and embarrassing. We don't have time to get into it now, but we got to go to one more. Excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by simply saying, look, it never happened. And when we look at this, we got to realize one thing, that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, all the writers of the New Testament were all Jewish believers in Yahweh. They already thought they were God's chosen people. Luke is the only Gentile. Here's my question. Why would these Jewish writers, what did they gain by making up a new religion? What did these guys get by making up a new religion? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? Well, first we get kicked out of the synagogue, then we get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up! You know, what a great idea. Why haven't we thought about this earlier? No. In fact, they had every reason to believe it didn't happen, the resurrection. Then it did. Sometimes I get the question, maybe you do, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yes, there are. I mentioned them briefly before. They're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know what's often underneath that question is an illicit assumption. Here's the illicit assumption. You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things, they make things up. If you think about that for more than 10 seconds, you'll realize how silly that assumption is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying it was true. They paid with it with their lives. Why would they do this? My friend J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline 5 times for solving murders decades old. He's been on Dateline more than any other cold case homicide detective. He's also a Christian, an apologist. In fact, I'll be with him this weekend in Dallas at Rethink. And he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, where he takes his cold case homicide skills and applies them to the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And he says, whenever I find a dead body, I know there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. It's not 1,000 reasons. It's only one of these 3 or a combination thereof. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Relationships, finances, or power, pride. Those are universal motivators for murder. In fact, they're universal motivators for just about everything we do. When we sin, we're trying to get one of those 3 things. Those are all good things. Sex, money, and power are good things. The problem is we take shortcuts to get them. That's called sin. So if anybody's going to try and pull off a conspiracy or lie about something, one or more of those 3 motivators are probably going to be part of this. Question: did the New Testament writers get chicks for saying Jesus had risen from the dead? Did they get money? Did they get power? No, they got exactly the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power as a Pharisee persecutor of the church. As soon as he became a Christian, he was persecuted. They had no motive to make this up. Every motive to say it wasn't true. They already were God's chosen people. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank. If you're going to say that martyrdom shows Christianity is true, don't you have to say that martyrdom proves, say, Islam is true? Because they have martyrs too. No. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one difference. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything. They just have faith that Islam is true. The New Testament martyrs of New Testament times witnessed Jesus rise from the dead. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. All right, last thing on this. And what I'm about to say, for those of you that believe the New Testament or the Bible is inerrant like I do, this is going to sound like heresy for a minute, but it's not. Just stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. How can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. There wouldn't even be a New Testament written by Jews in the first century unless Jesus rose from the dead. Why are they inventing this? The answer is they're not. In fact, you could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have a New Testament written by Jews in the first century unless Jesus rose from the dead. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Do you realize that? Our faith is based on an event, not a book. Now, thankfully, they wrote it down so we could know more about it and orient our lives by it. But if the book never existed, the event still would have occurred. We just wouldn't know much about it. Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Yeah, why? Because the risen Jesus appeared to him. Was John a Christian before he wrote the Gospel of John? Yeah, why? Because the risen Jesus appeared to him. He witnessed all this. In other words, they're writing down what had already occurred. So if someone ever comes up to you and says, oh, I found an error in the Bible, you know what you ought to say after you say, what is it? So, what does that prove? You found an error in the Bible. Does that mean everything in the Bible's false because you found one error? I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that many, if not all of the books in the University of Nebraska at Omaha Library have errors in them. Does that mean you get no good information from those books? Of course not. Look, inerrancy is not a premise. Inerrancy is a conclusion. You don't lead with inerrancy. You don't go to an atheist and say, hey, the reason you ought to believe in Christianity is because the Bible says so. That would be like some Muslim coming up to you and saying, the reason you ought to be a Muslim is because the Quran says so. You're going to say, I don't believe in the Quran. Exactly. You got to give evidence that the event took place. Then you can talk about the inerrancy of the Bible later down the road. The reason I believe in inerrancy is because Jesus did, and I just have a personal policy. If somebody rises from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. All right, so there's obviously more evidence, and none of these alone are totally convincing, but you put them all together, and I think it's a very strong case. Let's sum up the whole case again. Does truth exist? If someone says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Very good. Does God exist? We talked about those three arguments, cosmological, teleological, and moral. Are miracles possible? Well, Genesis 1:1 has already occurred. In fact, when people say they don't believe in miracles, I normally say, look around, you're living in one. This universe is a miracle. And then did Jesus rise from the dead? It looks like he did. There's very good evidence he did. So if you want to go further, you can get the books from Amazon or our website, DVDs, same thing. Text the word evidence to 44222. We're now teaching online courses. I teach I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Later this year, we'll be teaching Stealing from God. Sean McDowell is about to teach for us a very important course in our culture called Addressing Homosexuality with Clarity and Compassion. If you want to be a part of that, you better sign up soon because that's going to fill up quickly. There are courses taught by Gary Habermas, the top scholar in the world on the resurrection. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll see these videos. We put up one new video a day. And if you sign up for our email, we'll send you one new video a week, a Q&A video that you can share with other people. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it YouTwitface. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Have you signed up for YouTwitface yet? We're on radio Saturdays. We're on DirecTV Wednesday nights and also Roku, as you know. And if you don't do anything else, download the Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. It has the TV show on there. It has the streaming live. It also has the podcast on there. And it even has a quick answer section that can help you on the fly, right off your phone, converse with people on these issues. All right, last thing before your questions. It's true. The question you might be asking, okay, Christianity's true, so what? What does it mean to me? It means that somebody actually did die for you. That's what it means. When I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn wings, golden wings, and they were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in any military to earn than the golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people who start SEAL training make it through. 5, 10, maybe 15%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It's literally their military identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in California, in Rosecrans Cemetery near San Diego, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they showed up, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that died for them, the one that sacrificed for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But our culture says, oh no, don't put your identity in that. Put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your sexual orientation, or put your identity in your spouse, or put your identity in your school, or put your identity in your bank account or your vocation. None of those things are ultimate, ladies and gentlemen. You were meant, I was meant, to put our identity in our Savior. And an eyewitness who was there with Jesus actually wrote in his biography, we know as the Gospel of John, that he gave you, Jesus gave you the right to become a child of God. How do you do that? You repent and accept what he did for you. He not only died, he also rose again. And you know, as noble as what Michael Monsoor did, Michael Monsoor died for his friends. Jesus died for his enemies. We're all his enemies. And until we accept the gift he's provided for us, we'll remain his enemies. Why wouldn't we accept that? It's free. Have you ever accepted it? Why wouldn't you accept it? It's the greatest news ever. All right, before we go to questions, I want Wesley to come back up here. Wesley, if you would, come on up, because Wesley and Austin's over here too. These are the two gentlemen that made this whole event happen, along with Adam Johnson, who's here somewhere. Give him a hand if you would.
Yes, I'm Wesley Farewell. I'm with Ratio Christie over in Lincoln. That's where our chapter is, and that's the one that we work on. I wanted to tell you a little bit about that. If you did get one of these purple flyers, it's for Lincoln. So if you know anybody in Lincoln, send them our way. It tells you about what Ratio Christi does. Ratio Christi means reasons for Christ. It's Latin. So we give scientific, philosophical, and historical reasons to believe Christianity is true. And that's we're there to defend, and we're there to give a positive case for Christianity. And I'm also in the market to recruit, because I'm hoping, Lord willing, to come here and start one here in Omaha. So if you are out there and you're interested in starting a Ratio Christi or being on my team, come find me. I'll be back there. Right here, I'm going to pass it over to Austin. Okay.
Hey, I'm Austin. I work for Christian Student Fellowship. We're a campus ministry here at UNO. And we'd love to invite you, if you're not already involved in a ministry or a community and you're a student. It doesn't have to be at UNO. It can be at any area college or college age. We meet here on Monday nights at 7:30. There's a card near you or on your chair, and information's on here. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us through social media, or I'll be in the room somewhere after this as well. So thanks so much for coming.
Also, you meet in this room?
Not this room, sorry. Just right over here. And our location changes from time to time due to reservations, so all their information is on social media.
All right, thank you so much. These are the guys that made it happen. And what we're going to do now is go to questions. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. And we have a microphone set up over here so you can be seen on the internet. Yes, this is going on the internet, on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page. So if you would just come on up to the microphone, you can ask any question you want. And once one person comes up, then it'll start going a lot quicker. Once the one person, here he comes right now, get behind him. Don't wait till he sits down, okay? Line up behind him. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Jacob.
Jacob, go ahead, sir.
So I have watched your videos with Christopher Hitchens. I really enjoyed them. And I'm just because he's someone who doesn't agree with it. You can't help but like the guy.
Oh,
I'm also wondering if you know his brother at all, Peter.
I don't know Peter personally, but I know who he is. And Hitchens and I were just together, well, we were together actually 3 times because I saw him at another debate. And the first time I met him, I always loved Hitchens, even though I didn't agree with him. And I met him in the green room prior to the debate. And I said, you know, Christopher, I know we obviously don't agree on the God issue. That's why we're here to debate. But, you know, I really like a lot of your writings. I like your style. I'm kind of a fan. And he kind of grinned and shot me a look, and he said, "The night is young." So he was a great orator. I mean, it was my first debate of debating anybody except my wife, who routinely annihilates me. But my first formal debate, and while he was going on and on, I was just kind of mesmerized by his cadence, and I found myself daydreaming during the debate, But you can watch those debates. They're on our website. One was at the University of, the first one was at Virginia Commonwealth University. The second was at the College of New Jersey. They were back in 08 and 09. And so we kept up a email correspondence. In fact, the day after Thanksgiving 2011, I emailed him because I knew he was going through cancer treatment. I said, "Hey, Christopher, my brother-in-law was partially healed by a doctor at Sloan Kettering." Well, he was healed completely, but the doctor had partial responsibility for it, obviously, at Sloan Kettering in New York. "Can I put you in touch with him? Maybe he can help you." And he just emailed me back, and he said, "I'd like to renew our debates." I said, "Do you want?" So I had hope he was recovering. I said, "Do you want me to try and set something up?" He said, "No, not quite ready yet." 2 weeks later, he was dead. So that was my last correspondence with him. Thank you, Jacob. Yes, sir. What's your name? Ricky, go ahead, sir. Yes, graded absolutism is the idea. Well, let me set it up this way. Let me ask you guys a question. Suppose you're in Nazi Germany, and you are hiding Jewish people in your attic, and you hear a knock at the door. Schnell! Schnell! Come to the door. "Hast du Juden here?" What do? You're supposed to tell the truth, right? Do not bear false witness. Yeah, there's some Jews up in the attic. There's actually 4 of them up there, so if you only see 3, keep looking. No, what do you say? No Jews here. 9. You just lied. Yes. Because the graded absolutism ethic says that you have a higher duty to protect innocent life than you do to tell the truth to a guilty murderer. So when those absolutes conflict, protect life or tell the truth to a guilty murderer, you're exempted from telling the truth to the guilty murderer so you can protect life. And this was something developed by my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, my mentor, in his book, Christian Ethics. And it's been talked about prior to him, of course, obviously. Yeah.
Because I know people would use that as an argument to say, well, that there is no absolute morality in that regard. So
no, there is absolute. There are absolutes, but you always need context to know which absolute applies, right? So if you're on the witness stand in a trial, that's really the context of "thou shalt not bear false witness." Yes, you're supposed to tell the truth. But if the Nazis come to your door and you're hiding Jews, no. You have a higher duty to protect innocent people from evil. And Jesus, we always hear this, sin is sin, and all sins are the same. No, they're not. I mean, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. He gave 2, and he said, this is the second one. So there's a hierarchy. Jesus scolds the Pharisees in Matthew 23:23, where he says, you've tithed your spices, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law. See, so there are weightier matters, which would be a big scold on our government right now, because our government right now is telling us what kinds of straws we can and can't use, but they won't tell us don't murder your children. Jesus would be scolding us right now.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, what's your name?
Hi, my name is Micah Dunwoody.
Micah, how you doing?
Pretty good, how are you?
Great, go ahead.
Okay, so first off, I want to make a point of, I just want to say, feel free to believe in whatever you want. I'm not trying to persuade you, because, free will, God love free will, woo! So, I remember earlier you mentioned about moral compass, and that the North is pretty much God's moral compass, sort of idea of like, God is good, and therefore evil is a lack of good. So, I wanted to state out that the way that I perceive the universe is very much influenced by Taoism, and part of that is that I see things not really as good and evil, but kind of like a blank slate. Like things just happen as they happen. That good and evil are just concepts. And you even talking about having a different approach to that. I want to know what exactly is your idea to what I said about good and evil being concepts.
Well, they are concepts, but they're not just intellectual concepts. So, for example, if someone were to walk in here right now and shoot somebody, that's not a concept, that's an action. And that's an evil action. Would you agree?
Yes, I wouldn't. It's not something that I would do, but by my own but I would also say it's evil in a sense because you are hurting another human being.
Right. So, okay, so it's evil then. You're admitting there's evil. It's not just a concept. It actually can be played out in the real world in physical consequences, right?
Right. I guess.
Okay. So I guess we're not disagreeing. We're just maybe disagreeing as to what is the standard. What is the standard in Taoism?
What do you mean by the standard? Like a moral standard?
Yes.
Basically, the standard in Taoism is to return one to nature or to be one with the Tao, to flow with the universe as it goes along. Don't resist anything, just go with it.
When you say go with it, if the Nazis were trying to take over America, would you go with it or would you resist?
I would, in fact, resist.
Okay, so you're not a Taoist then.
Yeah, pretty much not.
Okay.
I mean, philosophically, but not religiously. The religious side, that's a totally different thing from the philosophical side.
Okay, so
yeah.
I actually think that you're just talking about concepts, Micah.
Okay.
And when it gets to the real world, you're more like we are.
Okay.
All right, is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay,
Since we're talking
good.
about it, it's like, yeah, he's got a good point.
Okay, well, thank you.
The man did his research.
Thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
My name is Matt. I'm
Go ahead,
asking
Matt.
a question on behalf of my good friend Brandon. He couldn't be here tonight, and
Okay.
he said he was going to listen to a live stream on Facebook. Do you know if it's being streamed?
Yes, it is on Facebook as far as we know, yeah.
Very cool. Hey,
Yeah.
Brandon. So here's my question that Brandon asked me to ask you. It says, current scientists and historians have a general consensus that the first humans were on the planet 200,000 years ago. However, the genealogies of Jesus would imply that the first humans were on the planet 6,000 years ago. Are historians wrong? Or is there something in the Bible that shouldn't be taken literally?
There are gaps in the genealogies, we know that. And we don't exactly know how far back Adam and Eve were. So there is some mystery there. If you try and add up the genealogies and disregard the gaps, yeah, you get something like Bishop Ussher came up with like 4004 BC, right? But most scholars today will say that's wrong. Now, as you know, there are a lot of different dating methods to try and figure out how old humanity is. Personally, I think the universe is at least 58 years old. Okay? In fact, I'm certain of it. All right, I'll throw my dad in there. Hi, Dad. It's at least 83. But there are dating assumptions regardless of how old you think the universe is. Speed of light from the stars is an assumption. Is it a good assumption? It probably is. Why? Because if you just change the speed of light, you got to change all the other laws of physics with it. So from a universe perspective, it seems that the universe is at least 13.8 billion years old. How old is humanity? They're all different estimates. 200,000 might be a good estimate. Some might put it further back, other closer. It changes quite frequently. So there's a bit of a mystery there as to how old it is. But regardless how old it is, you still need a creator, regardless. So it doesn't really change Christianity one way or the other.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Frank.
All right, thanks, Matt. Yes, go ahead. He'll get it. He'll get it. Don't touch Clint's mic. Yes, what's your name?
My name is Logan.
Hey,
Logan. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
It's all right, man.
I was just very curious about your idea of the believing in a Big Bang, and like what I understand for Big Bang, like there was a bang and it takes the expansion of like millions of years to get to where we're at. So are you like a old Earth creationist or a new Earth creationist? Like,
as I just mentioned, I think the evidence is better. The Earth is old and the universe is old. Might it be young? May I have something wrong? Sure, I'm open to that. But it seems the better evidence is that it's old. Yes.
so like with the Bible, like it seems like, I don't know, in my mind, like that kind of conflicts with the Bible because it doesn't seem like there's enough like history in the Bible to make it seem like it's old Earth. So how do you?
Well, why? Why do you think it doesn't?
It just doesn't seem like there's enough. I'm a Christian, by the way.
Yeah.
I like, you look at the genealogies, you like count up how many. Because
okay, as I just mentioned, Logan, maybe you were thinking about your question. We just talked about this a minute ago. There's gaps in the genealogies. Also, if you read Genesis 1:1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Okay, when did God create the heavens and the earth? In the beginning.
In the beginning.
It doesn't. You say, what about the days? The days don't begin till verse 3. And God said, the heavens and the earth, if you want to take a hyperliteral view of Genesis, are already created before the days ever begin. And then if you look at Genesis, you have what I think is an historical account told in a poetic way. You got all the days starting with the same phrase, ending with the same phrase. You've got creating the first 3 days, filling the next 3 days. Days 1 and day 4 are congruent, day 2 and day 5, day 4 and day 6. Okay? Then you get to the 7th day and God is at rest. Guess what? We're still in the 7th day right now. If the 7th day is longer, maybe the other days are longer. There's many different orthodox ways to interpret Genesis. I know that the bottom line is, regardless of how you interpret it, God created the heavens and the earth. How far back? Doesn't really matter to me. He created it at some point, and that's why we know that he is the creator.
Okay.
All
Thank
right?
you.
Thank you, Logan. From now on, everyone has to be the same height. All right? Yes, sir. What's your name?
Mike.
Mike, go ahead, sir.
I'm a fan, by the way. You came to CCC Church here in Omaha about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I saw you there. Are you familiar with John Walton?
Yes, I am. The framework view.
Yeah. So essentially the idea, the lost world of Genesis 1,
Yes.
the idea that we have original way to look at the scripture and that essentially Genesis might not be a scientific document at all.
No, it's not, but in fact, I don't necessarily agree with Walton's view, but I do agree with the fact that the Genesis account appears to be a polemic against other creation accounts in the ancient Near East, meaning they're responding to what the other ancient Near East cultures say about creation. The other ancient Near East cultures don't have God the creator of everything. They are created beings in the universe. So it's a stark difference from the other ancient Near East cultures the Genesis account is.
Gotcha. So they could be going on at the same time, the actual events of Genesis as well as the story being
Yes,
congruent.
they're written to... Remember, it seems to me that the Bible is written for us, or it wasn't written for 21st century people. Genesis is written so people 3,000 years ago could understand it, and people in the 21st century can understand it. They can't understand our culture, but we can understand theirs.
Gotcha.
Make sense?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna lower that quite a bit.
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name's Lexi.
Hey, Lexi.
So I wrote this down so I wouldn't mess it up. But how do you witness to those who claim to believe in Christianity but are actually members of sects which are theological cults like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons?
I think you have to, with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, it can be difficult because they tend to go in pairs so they can watch one another and make sure nobody slips up. And they won't take any data from outside, say, the New World Translation or the Jehovah's Witness documents. I've had Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door and I try and give them my book and they won't take it.
Yeah.
Right? But I just ask questions. And the key questions to ask somebody like a Jehovah's Witness who claims that Jesus isn't God, I ask them, if Jesus never claimed to be God, why did they kill him?
Yeah, true.
For claiming love your neighbor? That doesn't get anybody killed.
And what's interesting is that they still believe that Jesus died for their sins, but how is that atonement for their sins if he wasn't divine? I don't
Yeah,
get it.
he can't be a mediator if he's just human. He's got to be both human and divine to be a mediator between the two.
So then, do you think being a part of these cults is just as well as being an atheist?
Well, I don't know what you mean by that. That would be, let me put it this way. This is just a pragmatic opinion, or opinion on pragmatism in my view. I think people that come out of cults like Mormonism, like Jehovah's Witnesses, generally become either atheistic or agnostic. They rarely, or let me put, maybe not rarely, but less frequently become Christians because they feel like they've been duped. And they think that if they join another religious group, they're just going to get duped again. So let me just remain neutral and stay out of the whole thing. What they don't realize is that atheism is a faith as well. Atheism has beliefs as well, like everything's material, like there is no God, like everything's self-existing, we're just molecular machines. Those are positive beliefs. So it might be easier, in my view, to talk to somebody on average who's an atheist and doesn't have the experience of coming from a cult than speaking to a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon. But then on the other hand, if the Jehovah's Witness or Mormon is open, at least they have some religious concepts. At least they do believe in some kind of God. So it really depends on the individual, I suppose.
Cool.
All right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Dr. Turek. My name's Terry.
Hey, Terry.
Welcome back to Omaha. I was
Thank
here.
you.
I remember you were here in 2014 and with the gentleman from Christ Community. I was there as well. My question is, it relates to, in some of your past presentations, you've mentioned a link that you felt was between same-sex attracted individuals and no-fault divorce laws. Can you point us towards some resources that would speak more along those lines or have influenced your thinking on that?
I think what you might be referring to, if I'm understanding you right, I wrote a book called Correct, Not Politically Correct, How Same-Sex Marriage Hurts Everyone, which in the name of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity got me fired.
Okay.
And you can read about it. I wrote an article called Sex at Work. Do not Google that. Go to our website, crossexamine.org, and put it in the search engine. Sex at Work. You can read about it. I think what you may be referring to is my claim, along with my co-author, Dr. Geisler, in our first book, Legislating Morality, that the law is a great teacher.
Okay.
That the law teaches people right from wrong. Many people think whatever is legal is moral and whatever is illegal is immoral. I'll just give you a few examples. 150 years ago, we went to war over slavery, right? And a lot of people rationalized slavery because it was legal. Well, it's legal, you know, it must be moral. How many people today do you know think slavery, in this country anyway, is moral? Nobody. Now, are we more religious now or less religious now than we were 150 years ago? We're less. What's the difference? The law helped change attitudes about slavery. The 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment helped change attitudes about slavery, so people now rightfully, the law is a good teacher in this regard. It teaches people something that is true and right. On the other hand, laws against abortion were all in place in this country up until 1973, when 7 unelected justices in black robes overturned the will of the people in all 50 states by judicial fiat. Today, we're now about evenly split. What changed? The law changed. Prior to 73, most people thought abortion was immoral because it was illegal and vice versa. Today, we're about evenly split because the law has given people an excuse. Well, if it's legal, it must be moral. We're doing the same thing with no-fault divorce, which has led to same-sex marriage. Now we're trying to legalize marijuana, which is just going to create more trouble for us because it's going to teach people, hey, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Almost got your wish there. My name's Tierney Dodd.
Say again?
Tierney Dodd.
Tierney?
Close
Tierney?
enough.
Tierney.
Thank you.
Sorry, okay, go ahead.
Let me first make it clear that I do not support Darwinism. My view on it is, if man evolved from monkeys and apes, why the heck do we still have monkeys and apes? What I would like to know is, what is your view on it?
Okay, well, it depends on what you mean by evolution. First of all, an evolutionist wouldn't say that we came from monkeys and apes. What they would say is, we came from some common ancestors. And so apes and monkeys came from the same sort of common ancestor we came from, not that that we came directly from monkeys and apes. So to be fair, that's what they would say, okay? Now, I believe in microevolution. I believe that there is adaptation within a kind, but I think macroevolution has too many problems with it. I don't think macroevolution is true. And I could give you several reasons why I don't think it's true. But let me just, for the sake of argument, say if it is true, it does not affect Christianity. Because God still exists and Jesus still rose from the dead. It might cause us to, say, reinterpret some passages in the Old Testament more allegorically, like Augustine might, but it wouldn't mean that Christianity is false. This is one of the things that I think is a big problem with people who are evolutionists. They think if evolution's true, well, Christianity's false. That does not follow at all. Evolution, if it explains anything, explains new life forms. It doesn't explain where the universe came from. Doesn't explain why the universe is fine-tuned. Doesn't explain where objective moral values comes from. Doesn't explain where consciousness comes from. Doesn't explain where the first life comes from. Doesn't explain the natural laws that drive everything, including evolution, if it's true. So you would still need God, even if evolution's true. Make
True
sense?
enough. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Joseph.
Joseph, go ahead.
Okay, so I met a friend today who's an atheist. First time I met him, and I tried to invite him to this, but he couldn't make it. So
okay.
He just texted me the question, do you still believe that healings exist?
Yes, I think healings do exist. And I think, again, if you went to my friend Craig Keener's book, Miracles, you would find ample documentations for healings.
Okay,
so, yes.
so yeah, I know he's watching, so I just wanted to say this.
Okay. But let me say one other thing, though, Joseph. Even if healings don't exist, Christianity's still true.
Yeah.
It's not a defeater of Christianity. But go ahead.
So when I was 18, I was diagnosed with lupus nephritis.
Yes.
Which is an autoimmune disease. So I was on kidney dialysis, chemotherapy treatments, under 15 kinds of medications. So until I gave my life to Jesus, through faith and obedience, after 3 years of fighting this disease, I was healed. Doctors couldn't explain it. My doctor was a Hindu, and yeah. And he brought me into his office one time because he couldn't explain the blood work until he did a double check on my labs, and then he said, he sat me down and said, I don't know how to explain this, but your kidney functions are back to normal. The first thing I told him when I met him, I was like, watch, God's going to heal me. And he's like, all right, let's just continue on procedures. But it happened, and he was just like mind blown, and I was even mind blown. But yeah, so I know he's watching, so I just want to say healings do exist because God healed me, and I'm still alive today from a disease that almost killed me. And so, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel, go ahead.
I am a Christian. I've been a Christian for about 5 years now. And when I first came to the faith, your work was really helpful to me, and it's really made me strong in my faith, and it drove a passion for me to be in ministry right now. So I really want to thank you for that.
Excellent. Thank you.
But also, I just have a question. With it being like the American church, we crave head knowledge, and we don't really do a whole lot with it. There's not really a big change of heart as a whole, like Big C Church. My question to you is, with you going around, you doing these kind of events, there's a lot of Christians here. There's way more Christians here than there are atheists here. And I've seen some really cool videos, so I'm not trying to be disrespectful at all. I've seen really cool videos of you addressing big topics to atheists. My question to you is, with these kinds of events, how many people do you see be saved? And like, how much change do you really see in people? And do you have anything inspiring that you can say to these young kids that they can actually go out there and apply all of this information that you've just given them to see change and to see people be saved and to come into the kingdom?
Yeah, excellent question. Well, we don't normally take surveys, after the event. You can take our survey. we just started doing this. This is probably only the third or fourth event we've done that. So if you want to say you got saved tonight, amen. You can tell us. Just text the word event to that number there, and then it'll send you a survey and you can respond. I was at an event in Towson State, October 2018. There's about 200 all students in the room, and the organizer took a survey, and he told me 2 weeks later, well, 8 people got saved. I never knew that. But this venue, that's not the primary purpose for it. We hope it happens, but this venue is really just to present the evidence to people and let them make their own decision. And it's also to encourage Christians that there is good evidence out there for what they believe, and so they can take some of these concepts and go and share it with others. But I have no delusions that you hear one seminar and you're going to become a world famous apologist, or you're going to become really skilled in this. Like anything, it takes a lot of work. So this may just be a catalyst for somebody to try and say, I want to learn more about that. I want to take some courses. Maybe I want to go to school. Maybe I want to go to seminary. Maybe I just want to learn more on my own by reading these books so I can be better equipped. And so that's what I hope people do with it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Did you grow up in the UK?
Yeah.
Where?
South London.
South London.
Yeah.
You ever go to Kensington Temple over there?
Yep.
Love that place.
Yeah.
Are you living in here now?
Yeah, I just moved to Omaha to start a ministry, actually, and that's how I found about
What's
about
it called?
It's World Harvest. It's called World Harvest.
All right. You got a website?
Not yet.
right.
I've been here for like 2 months.
All right. Well, get busy. Come on. Have you seen anybody saved yet?
No, I haven't. That's why I'm here.
All right. Come on. All right. Thanks, Daniel. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Jordan.
Jordan, go ahead, sir.
Can I have 2 questions?
That's one.
Okay.
Use them wisely,
Yeah,
Skywalker.
Okay, so my first one is this. Grew up atheist, became a Christian at 20.
Okay.
Radical, and had to kind of trace it backwards, right? So didn't believe in Jesus at day one. Knew something radical had happened in my life and started tracing it back.
Get a little closer to that mic if you would.
Okay, so as I traced it back, pieces start falling into place. I'm like, okay, it's this Jesus. So everything I experience is this Jesus of the Bible. Want to learn more about this. Then you step back into the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And my question is this. I'm a married man. So I know that you can lose communication in one sentence from one person to another that you grew up in the same town with. Mm-hmm. So what wisdom do we have as we do some youth ministry, as they say, to just send people into the Old Testament when there's 2,000 years distracted and stories that, like I said, we can lose meaning between two people. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at some of these stories in the Old Testament, mm-hmm. what wisdom do we need to have before we walk into some of that stuff?
Well, this is why the Bible, on one hand, is a very easy book to understand on the basics. Anybody can understand that they need to repent and be saved. On the other hand, it's probably the deepest book in all of world literature. And you'll never exhaust yourself trying to learn about the infinite God, because you're never going to learn enough about him. You're just going to keep going. So there are difficult passages in the Bible that require some background information and some study. That's why in today's day and age, I think we're at a great advantage, because you can go to the internet and read commentaries on the Bible and get the context so you can understand really what's going on. Years ago, before individuals even had a Bible, they couldn't do that. You know, they had no Bible. So we're living in an age where we can have these resources, and I'm troubled by a verse in the Bible that is something Jesus said, where he said, to whom much is given, much will be required. We're given a lot. So I think we have to give people the tools to understand the Bible properly. Some of them are free online, so that's one way we can deal with that.
Secondly, what's your opinion on someone, I mean, we live in an age of just plurality, mm-hmm. right? And I think part of that comes with the wisdom. And since I grew up an atheist, I saw what I perceived as a fallout from the church of fundamentalism. Mm-hmm. I thought that questions, doubts, fears weren't taken serious enough.
They're not in most churches. That's the problem.
And so I wonder, when we live in this day and age, what do we need to hold as being okay with plurality? I mean, and I'll give an example. Ben Shapiro talks about this, right? He's a Jew, and he talks about these are my Jewish faith, religious beliefs, yet I'm okay with like the legalization of marijuana.
Okay.
And so he, as a society, it's not a theocracy. I think these things are okay, and in my faith, I think these things are okay. Do you see that as a split that's dangerous over time?
No, I think there are some things that you may think that you wouldn't do, but you might allow others to do. Like, for example, you would not worship God, but you can't force other people to worship God, right? And you have to make judgment calls. For you, Paul talks about this in Romans 14. Wine may be no good for you, but your neighbor might be fine for. Don't divide over those issues. But when we're talking about life and death issues, if you talk to Ben Shapiro, he'll tell you, I got a big problem with abortion, rightfully so. I don't care what your religious views are. It's wrong. So there are issues that are primary issues. Jesus would say the weightier matters of the law. And then there are other issues that we can have some freedom on. And I want to point out, too, that when people talk about the separation of church and state and all that, they typically don't even know what they're saying. Most of us in the political realm are not trying to legislate religion. I'm not trying to tell people where, when, how, or if to worship or to be a member of a particular church or any of that. But I am trying to tell people how they ought to treat one another, and that's legislating morality, and that's what all laws do. Everybody's trying to legislate a moral position. The only question is whose moral position would we legislate? And I'm of the opinion we ought to legislate the moral position that our founding document began with. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And I think you can look at those truths and derive good laws from them. Some laws are a little bit more murky, and that's why we have legislatures to figure those out. But on the big issues, like life, we ought to be unified on that. We ought not be murdering people for our own convenience.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi. Abraham.
Abraham, go ahead.
Abraham Moden. I'm here with Bro Life. Bro Life's back in the background. Shout out to Bro Life, youth
right.
ministry from Norfolk, Nebraska. So, anyways, just like my two colleagues here, Daniel, right, and Jordan, was also atheist for about 2 weeks, and then I got scared and became a Christian. But now I grew up like in dealing with drugs and all that stuff, and so a lot of what I came across in my search for Christianity were some alternative claims. You know, I don't know if you've heard of the mushroom theory, that Jesus was a mushroom, extraterrestrial origin, you know, that we're living in a simulation, and or multi-dimensional theory. When I hear these people, they seem so grounded in it. I'm just like what in the world? How could you be so grounded in it? And some of the claims of why they're grounded, it's because supposedly, that's kind of a two-part question. Why, the question is the biblical narrative a collection of plagiarized stories, such as the virgin birth, the resurrection of Christ, et cetera, et cetera?
No.
I don't know if you've heard of any of these claims.
Is that a good answer? No.
Yeah, that's a great answer, actually.
No, they're not.
But,
okay?
Right.
And for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, we couldn't go through them all, but these are eyewitness accounts. And when people go on the internet and say, oh, I found that the parallels between, say, these ancient stories and the New Testament, look at all these parallels. You ought to say to them, just because on the internet doesn't mean it's true, right? What are your sources?
Right.
In fact, my friend Greg Kokel, who wrote a great book called Tactics You All Ought to Read, says there are 3 questions you ought to ask somebody when they come up with a theory. You don't have to refute the theory. They have to support the theory. So if they say, well, you know, Jesus is borrowed from ancient pagan myths, the first question you ought to ask is, what do you mean by that? Explain what you mean. I got to understand the theory that you have here. Second question you ask is, how did you come to that conclusion? In other words, what evidence do you have for that position? See what they say. Most people don't have evidence. They just heard a slogan. They saw a web link, and they think they've got it, right? The third question is your opportunity to provide some evidence back. Like, have you ever considered, fill in the blank, have you ever considered that the pagan resurrection myths, nearly all of them post-date Christianity rather than predate Christianity. So if anybody's stealing from anybody, it's those pagan resurrection myths stealing from Christianity, not the other way around. Okay?
Yeah, every time I come across that, it always seems, I can't really get a clear picture of it because it's so distorted.
That's why you need to really ask for clarification. It's very important you ask for clarification and ask for evidence. And that alone, asking those 3 questions will be enough for the person to walk away scratching their head. You hardly have to say anything because they realize they really don't have evidence for that position. Now, let me mention one other thing, that these questions are in our app, the Cross-Examined app, and you can use them for anything. Like parents, these 3 questions I just mentioned, you can use them with your kids. So if your son calls you one night, your teenage son, and says, Dad, I'm not going to be home by 11 like you wanted me to, don't panic. Just say, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered if you're not home by 11, you're going to be grounded for 2 weeks? Right home, Dad. By the way, husbands, never, ever, ever ask these questions of your wife. Because if she calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? You know, how did you come to that conclusion? She's going to have a list 25 years long, and you are toast. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Isaac, and I'm along with Bro Life from Norfolk, Nebraska.
Okay, good. How you doing? Go ahead.
I'm doing pretty good today. I have a question that's been bugging me for a really long time. I don't hold this question or belief, however you want to look at it, to be true to myself, but I grew up in a home. My mom is a Christian. My dad, he's not exactly an atheist. He told me after I talked to him for quite a while that he's not closed off to the idea of a theistic God. His main conflict is whether that God is benevolent at all. He thinks that an all-powerful and all-controlling God would only create a concept of sin and sacrifice and punishment out of malevolence.
Okay, I'd have to ask him what he meant by that, but the very fact that he understands what malevolence is presupposes he understands what good is. If he understands evil, he knows what good is. My question for him would be, what do you mean by good? Because if there's no God, nothing is good, and nothing is evil.
The way he puts it is his kind of moral compass is things that benefit humanity. He feels like some sins that are stated in the Bible are obsolete and just meant as some kind of punishment, I suppose.
Well, guess what? He's right. Some sins in the Bible are obsolete. That's exactly what the writer of Hebrews says, that the old covenant is obsolete. So the dietary laws in the Old Testament, they're obsolete. They don't apply to us anymore. The law given, I know this is going to sound crazy for some Christians, but the law given to Moses does not apply to Christians unless it's repeated in the New Testament. And 9 out of the 10 commandments are repeated in the New Testament. But all the dietary laws, all those laws in the Old Testament, from Exodus 20 through Deuteronomy, they're just for Israel. They're not for us. The new covenant has come to replace the old covenant. So your dad is right to a certain extent. We can eat shrimp and all that. So he's right about that. But he is, whatever he's saying, he has a moral standard in his mind. My question would be, what is that moral standard? Where does that come from? Is that just your opinion? Or are you suggesting that there is a real standard up there that is grounded in God's nature?
I guess I can't really speak for him.
Right.
I can just go off what I know most about him. I just know he grew up in Christianity. He grew up as a Catholic, a very strict Catholic. And I'm not saying this as any disrespect towards Catholics. It's just that he grew up in very little understanding and love towards God before he was, raised in all of the legalities and the rules of Christianity without any really understanding of why. And I think that may be why he holds such hesitance to believe in it. And I think his hesitance as a whole to believe in a God is his fear that it's a malevolent God. And I think we'd all be afraid of that.
Yeah, I understand the psychological aspect of that. I came out of Catholicism too, and I went to Catholic high school, and I have great respect for many Catholic beliefs, but I'm not a Catholic now. But I can see that sometimes legalism, whether it's in Catholicism or even Pentecostalism now, there's legalism on Protestantism too, that can be very much a hindrance to grace, which is really the center of the entire Christian story. that Jesus comes to save us, and there's nothing we can do to merit favor from him. He does it all. So maybe if you can somehow communicate to your dad it's all about grace anyway, that would be helpful.
I think the way he sees it is that he has nothing to be saved from. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
You know what's really hard? It's really hard to try and evangelize your parents. It just is. Or not just your parents, your family, right? You're almost too close. So all you can do is pray, plant seeds every now and then, and find opportunities to move the ball forward. That's really all you can do.
And it's probably an uphill battle when it comes to a child to a parent. But, you know,
Yes.
when I can't really relate to it because it was kind of a conflicting religious household between my mother and my dad. You know, we kind of agreed, unless it's in a family context. The rest of my mother's side is religious. You know, we'll pray at meals, but we don't usually pray at meals in my house. And I guess that's done as a compromise. But in reality, I guess it's just letting my dad's side of beliefs kind of win at that point, because without acknowledging the presence of God or being thankful to him, you're just...
Well, here's one thing you can do, and then I need to move on, but here's one thing you can do. Just like in the book of Corinthians, Paul says for a believing wife to try and sanctify the husband, you can do the same for your dad, and you're supposed to respect your parents anyway. You can treat him with the love of Christ and pray for him, realizing that he has a different past than you have, and there may be psychological reasons why he's taken the position he has. So just try and love him as best you can to the Lord.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, how's it
Yes,
going?
sir. What's your name?
John.
John, go ahead.
So I had a question about kind of your view on evolution and how that fits in with the Bible. Because you kind of said in the beginning of this the seminar kind of that you believe in the Big Bang, you just know who banged it. So my question would be, since evolution uses death to create new species, to create new life, death came after Adam. So how does that justify with the Bible?
A lot of Christians think that you couldn't have death before the fall, but that's not what the Bible says, because Romans 5:12 says death came to all men through Adam's sin, not that death came to all creation. So death could have occurred before, depending on how old the universe is, could have occurred before Adam's sin, could have been in place. And there's a number of ways of looking at this. If you think about this, why would God need to create a garden if the whole world was a paradise? And there was a fall before the fall, wasn't there? There was the fall of Satan before the fall. Could that have affected creation? We're not told.
Yeah.
We're just saying that there are other things to consider. The one thing, though, that I think needs to be exposed here is this false idea that because of Adam's sin, the whole creation, or the death came to all creation because of Adam's sin. That's not what the text says. It says death came to all men.
It doesn't say death came through Adam.
To men, yes.
Okay.
But
So it kind of
animal death could have occurred before that.
So like sin went. So death came through Adam, but sin went before Adam. You know, so like traveled through time.
What I'm saying is there could have been death before the fall of Adam in the animal world. Because the Bible doesn't say that death came to the animal world through Adam's sin.
Okay.
It says it came to humanity through Adam's sin. All right?
Cool. I'd have to think about that. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Joel. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Lane. Name's Lane.
Leighton.
Lane.
You say?
Lane, yeah.
Lee, go ahead. All right.
It needs a hard consonant sound. It's hard to, I've told my parents that, but anyways, the question I had was, you said at the beginning that we won't be proving the Old Testament tonight, or the Old Testament, because in order to prove the Old Testament, we'll prove that the New Testament is true. And that the truth of the New Testament will prove that the Old Testament is true. And I definitely believe that. I mean, as reading more and more of the New Testament, it kind of just continuously point back to the Old Testament. And the more you read the New Testament, more you fall in love with the Old Testament. But one of your 8 points to proving that the New Testament is true is expected predictions.
Yeah.
And you made a comment that your greatest argument for that is Isaiah 53. So I think you kind of see how I can get a little bit of a predicament of how you reference the Old Testament, Isaiah 53, to prove the New Testament, when we have to prove the New Testament to prove the Old Testament. And my other question was, do you suggest using the Old Testament to prove the New Testament? I don't know if that...
Well, all I'm saying is that the sacrifice of Christ, the suffering servant, was predicted 700 years in advance. And we have scrolls that are at least 100 to 200 years older than Jesus of Isaiah. In fact, one of them is in the Shrine of the Book Museum in Israel, in Jerusalem. It's a 24-foot-long scroll of the entire book of Isaiah, probably the greatest of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It has all of Isaiah chapter 53 in there. And if you ask a Jewish person who isn't aware of where you're reading from, who is this about? If you read Isaiah 53, they'll say that's about Jesus. And they'll say it's in the New Testament. You go, no, that's in the Old Testament. In fact, to this day, many synagogues will skip over Isaiah 53. They'll go from 52 to 54. So what I'm saying is that there is prophecy in the Old Testament pointing to Jesus. And the apologetic method that I'm using here is to confirm the confirm the New Testament, and then on Jesus' authority, affirm the Old Testament. But there are ways to affirm the Old Testament by itself. And one of those is to look at predictive prophecy.
Gotcha.
All right?
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi there. My name is Josiah.
Josiah, go ahead.
I was wondering do we have the ability to interpret some parts of the Old Testament as allegorical and some parts as not? And if we do, how do we differentiate between what we can and cannot deem allegorical?
Of course. The same thing is true in the New Testament. When you see Jesus is the door, you don't think he has a doorknob and hinges, right?
Sure.
You have to look at the text to try and see whether or not this text is poetry. Is it parable? Is it metaphor? Is it law? Is it history? Is it apocalyptic literature? Is it prophecy? I mean, there's so many different types of literature that should clue you in as to how to interpret it. And that's just one of the, what we call in theology, hermeneutics. One of the hermeneutical methods is to try and discover what type of literature it is. In fact, we have a DVD set called How to Interpret Your Bible. And it goes through how to do this. So, yes, you have to interpret the passage based on how it was meant to be interpreted, and one of the ways you can discover how it was meant to be interpreted is to discover what kind of literature it is.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
My name is Brooke.
Brooke, go ahead.
If a non-believer were to come up and ask you if God can do anything, why is there still suffering in the world, what would you say?
I would say we're about out of time. No, I would say that suffering originates with free will, our free will. God gave us free will so we could love. The problem is that we can also use our free will to cause suffering, to sin and to cause suffering, and that's what we did. And so the entire story of Christianity is an answer to the problem of evil or suffering. You have paradise lost in Genesis, paradise regained in Revelation. Everything in between is the story of redemption. So Jesus comes in to the bloodline of Jesus is traced in the Old Testament until he comes into this world to live the perfect life in our place, and then for us to put our trust in him so he can ultimately save those who want to be saved, and he can separate himself from those that don't want him. You see, God has two possible ways to end all evil and suffering. Number one, he can take away our free will, or number two, he can quarantine evil. He decides that he's going to do number two in the sense that he's going to take away and quarantine evil in a place called hell. But right now, we're still in this intermediate state where we all have to make a choice.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Cha. I wanted to ask, are there mistakes in the Bible? And if there are, can we fully rely on it?
or believe everything the Bible says?
There are errors in the manuscripts, but not errors in the original. And how do we discover what the original is? We compare the manuscripts and reconstruct them. That's what we do. And we can do that with great accuracy. Even Bart Ehrman, the famous skeptic from UNC Chapel Hill, who wrote the book Misquoting Jesus, will admit, despite the variant readings of the manuscripts, that we can reconstruct the New Testament with great accuracy, and none of the cardinal doctrines of Christianity are affected by any manuscript errors.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi,
Sir,
Frank.
what's your name?
Ernie.
Ernie, you say?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Like Bert and Ernie.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to comment. I'm part of Campus Fellowship here at UNO. Yeah, there's my,
All right.
my group. I actually have 2 questions for you. My first
Uh-huh.
one is, why does God love us so much? I love him because he loved me first, but why does he love us? We don't deserve it.
Well, he is a loving being, and he created us in his image, meaning we're his ambassadors here on earth.
Yeah.
So his nature is to love, and that's why he loves us.
I agree.
Okay.
And my second question is, what advice can you give to a young man or woman who loves the Lord with their whole heart and wants to do everything they can to glorify him and change the world?
Wow, what a great question. I would say get educated, number one. Go to a conservative school that will help you better defend the faith and better understand God and theology so you can share that with others. Because you can only share what you already have yourself. You can't give what you haven't got. And if you really want to be able to give people what Jesus has given you, then you've got to study to show yourself approved. You've got to have that.
Do you mean like seminary or like an institution like
Well, it
this?
depends on what you want to do, but I always recommend a good seminary. Yeah,
Okay.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without seminary.
Yeah.
No way.
Are there any schools that you personally
Southern
recommend?
Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu.
Is that in Southern Carolina?
It is in North Carolina and Charlotte. You can check that out, ses.edu. That's where I went.
Okay, great.
Also, Adam back there, Adam Johnson went there, and you're going to Southeastern now? He's going to Southeastern. You could go there. You could go to Houston Baptist. You could go to Biola. What else am I leaving out, Adam? Midwestern in Kansas. There's good ones out there. There's
Great.
plenty of choices, but not a lot of choices. I mean, there's some.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say plenty. There's some. All right?
Great. Thank you
Great
very
question.
much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
I'm Haley, and I'm asking this question on behalf of one of my friends.
Okay.
She was wondering about Jessica Mitchell and how her brothers thought it was unjust that she was abused, and that's why why they turned into atheist. So she's pretty much asking, why does God allow us to live through problems like this and allow anything evil to happen to us? Because of Eve's sin, there is things like evil, sickness, poverty, and so many other hateful and horrid things, such as Jessica's situation.
Mm-hmm. Why does God allow evil to continue? Is that the question?
Yes.
I'm reminded of something that happened at the University of, it was Michigan State University. It had to be 10 years ago. And I was going through this presentation, and I knew there was a pretty militant atheist in the audience because he sat through the entire presentation like this. He didn't crack a smile once, and I had some pretty good jokes in there. All right? Anyway, when the time for Q&A came up, he shot his hand up right away, and I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "If there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world?" And I said, "Sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you and me, because we do evil every day." Again, if God wants to stop all the evil in the world, he might start with me and you. Question for everyone in here. If God decided to stop all the evil in the world at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? The reason there's evil in the world is because there's free will. And if God were to interfere with our free will routinely, this wouldn't be a moral universe. He gives us the ability to do good through our free will, but also the ability to do evil. Now, as I said earlier, what ultimately is going to happen is that God is going to take the punishment that we deserve on himself, and for those that don't want that, he will quarantine the evil they want to do in a place called hell. In the meantime, evil can actually bring forth good. And I don't have time to get all the details here, but if you read 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul says our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater weight of glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, for what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So going through difficulty here can actually enhance your capacity to enjoy God, not only now, but in eternity. As Peter Kreft put it, this world is a terrible resort, but it's a great gym. All right?
Yep. And
Thank
just
you.
to clarify, I am a
Okay.
Christian.
Thank you. And by the way, if you want more on that, the book Stealing from God will help. There's a chapter on evil. Check that out. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Tawny.
Tawny, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a Christian, but my brother is an atheist, so this question's on behalf of him. He said, what evidence is there to validate the Bible without using one's feelings or the Bible itself? He said, in quotations, evidence being historical records other than biblical writings. And he said, for example, the ancient Egyptians were already keeping records for hundreds of years before the flood and did not seem to notice that their entire civilization was wiped out or that a flood occurred at all.
Actually, just about every ancient civilization has a flood story. Okay? But Noah and the flood, you don't have to believe in Noah and the flood to be a Christian. Okay? I believe in Noah and the flood because Jesus did. And I just have a personal policy. If somebody rises from the dead, I just believe whatever he says. Okay? But some of the evidence we went through earlier briefly is evidence that this Jesus actually did rise from the dead. Okay? I can't go through it all over again. And there's a lot more detail in the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book. But let me say this. When an atheist asks for evidence, I'm going to ask him this question. Why is there evidence for anything? Let's forget Jesus for a second. Why are we in a universe where our minds can ascertain truths external to us and draw conclusions that are valid and true about the real world? Because our minds were designed to do that, and because this is an orderly universe whereby we can discern reliable cause and effect and draw conclusions. That shouldn't happen on atheism. Again, if we're just moist robots, we shouldn't be able to get evidence for anything. The very fact that we can get evidence for something shows that there's an orderer out there who has created our minds and created this universe in an orderly way so we can discern it and draw conclusions about it. Make sense?
Yep.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Vincent.
Hey, Vincent, go ahead.
I'm a Christian, and I've got this issue with a friend of mine who, he has literally told me before about how he cannot believe in a God who would send children to hell. And you've talked about, I've watched your videos before about how you talked about how when people have asked, what about those who have never heard of Jesus? And you've given valuable answers, but I believe those answers more pertain to those who are a bit more grown and have a better understanding of the world, not so much of what about those who were to die in the womb
It's an excellent question, Vincent. And first of all, I would say to the atheist, he says, I can't believe in a God who would do this thing. He's assuming a moral standard when he does that. Why would that be wrong if there is no God? Where is he getting his moral standard, in other words, to say that something in the Bible that he thinks is in the Bible is wrong? He's assuming a standard. He's stealing a standard from God in order to say God doesn't exist. But let me point this out, that what he says in there I don't think is in the Bible. I don't think God sends children to hell. And the best we can do from the biblical data is to look what happened to David's son. David's son that he had with Bathsheba died. And after the child died, David stopped mourning, and his colleague said, why did you stop mourning? He's dead. And David said, he will not come to me, but I will go to him. implying that he was going to see his son again. Now, God is going to be fair because he is the standard of fairness. Nobody in the afterlife is going to get a raw deal. Everybody's going to get either grace or justice. And nobody's going to say, God, you gave me a raw deal. So the God that your friend is thinking about does not exist.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. Yes.
Mr. Turek, I just
Yes.
want to say it's an honor to meet you, finally. I've read your book about 4 years ago. It was amazing. I was in a time in my life that I was really struggling with talking with atheists, but reading that, it was a definite benefit. My name is Noah. I'm a university student here. I'm part of a group called TORN, Truth or Religious Nonsense. It's a group of basically a worldviews group where a bunch of people get together and we talk about religion, science, philosophy. I've had many conversations with people over the last few years of high school and college about why God allows evil. And one of the most intriguing questions that came to within the last month or so is, if God wants what's best for us, if he wants good things to happen to us, why would God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden in the first place? And that's kind of the question I want to bring to you. Why would he put that tree there in the first place?
Because he has to give us an opportunity to exercise our free will. If we can't exercise our free will, then we can't love. And if we can't love, this is not a moral universe.
Yep.
So he gives us an opportunity to make the right choice or the wrong choice. We chose the wrong choice, and immediately God initiated a rescue plan.
Yep.
And that's Christianity.
I just want to say I am a Christian. I've been at this for 10 years. I just wanted to hear that for the
right,
record
all right.
for anybody who
just
for anybody who has doubts.
All right, thank you. All right, yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Logan.
Logan, go ahead, sir.
Do you take the Bible literally about Noah's Ark when it says like every animal, or do you believe like it took canines, felines? Because like I feel like it's improbable that it would bring like 2 of each animal, or do you believe it brought like 2 of every species?
Every type? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. I know there's down at the Creation Museum, a Noah's Ark expedition, or expedition. Yeah, they're looking for Noah's Ark in Kentucky. I'm really tired. This is my 4th night of doing this in a row, so I'm sorry. But there's a Noah's Ark, what do you call it? Huh? Exhibit. Thank you. Thank you, yeah. Yeah, you shouldn't ask me any questions anymore, man. I'm like dying up here.
Totally understand.
Okay, I think that the statistics have been, if I can remember correctly, have been looked into with regard to this. And he could have gotten 2 of every type. Maybe not, like, maybe he just had cats. And then through microevolution, you have all the different kinds of cats after that, right? But I wouldn't think he had every kind of dog in there, right? Because you can eventually get different kind of dogs through microevolution and breeding and that kind of thing. That's what I would assume, but I'm no expert on that.
So you believe in the microevolution then?
Of course. Yeah, we see microevolution. Skin color is an example of microevolution.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right. The lady in orange is the last one, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hello. So you mentioned Ehrman, or Ehrman,
Yeah.
I don't know how he pronounces
Yeah.
it, but as someone who's read his stuff, and I think he's kind of out there, but he uses a lot of supplemental materials to support his ideas about the New Testament. And he quotes like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary and all that. So, and I remember hearing you talk about Josephus. So I wondered, what is your line of scrutiny for what kind of supplemental materials we should kind of take with a grain of salt, or just think it's written by some kook who thinks they're cool and wants to plagiarize? Or,
yeah,
I
well,
should say,
the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Peter, these are all known 2nd century works, not written by those people. Those people were long dead.
Correct.
You see, the way plagiarism works today is I steal something from you, I put my name on it.
Yeah.
The way it worked then was they write something and steal somebody's name to make it seem authoritative. Correct. And that's why they were using names like Peter, Thomas, and Judas. So people in the 2nd century who say, well, maybe these were written by Peter, Thomas, and Judas. Those are authority figures. We ought to heed what they say.
Right.
But Ehrman knows just as much as anybody else they're not on par with the Gospels. They're not eyewitness accounts like the Gospels are.
Right.
So I think you have to look and see when the books were written to see if they were written by an eyewitness or somebody who knew eyewitnesses. And the Gospels in the 2nd century were not.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name is Mackenzie.
Hey, Mackenzie.
I'm asking this question on behalf of my friend, and she was wondering this question because her grandpa had passed away, and her grandmother and him had a very God-centered relationship. She was wondering why aren't couples still married in heaven?
The famous passage that Jesus said, and I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. It's in Matthew 20, what? Help me out, folks. Wherever it is. He says they're not given or taken in marriage, right? Because the Pharisees were trying to trap him. You know, a guy dies, and then the next brother is supposed to take care of the woman, and he dies, and they continue to die. Whose husband is she in heaven? And he says, that's it, thank you. He says they're not given or taken in marriage. Well, probably one reason there's not marriage in heaven is because there's no procreation in heaven.
If you can you glorify God through marriage?
You're supposed to here, absolutely. You're supposed to glorify God in whatever you do. But we will still know our spouses, and if we're not married in heaven, according to this passage, that doesn't mean we don't still have a relationship with our spouse. I haven't really thought about this, but I wouldn't think there was sex in heaven. I mean, people go, I think C.S. Lewis said something about this when he said, people can't imagine there's no sex in heaven. How could there be any fun in heaven then? And it would be like a kid who's just learning about sex saying to parents, do you eat chocolate when you're having sex? You don't eat chocolate when how can that be any good then if you're not eating chocolate when, in other words, it really is getting late, friends. Okay, but the point here is that God has something planned for us, as Paul says, beyond what we can imagine. And just because we can't quite imagine it, we say, well, if we can't have this or we can't have that like we have it here on earth, it can't be that good. That's bad thinking.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mackenzie.
Excuse me. Do we have time for one more?
Do we have time for one more? All right, one more.
Sorry to keep you up here.
That's all right.
Since we were talking about sex.
People are going to start coming back in if you keep talking like this.
So, got a question here in Exodus. I was reading the other day, came across this. Actually, me and my brother kind of wondering this. So it says here, if a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
What do I think about it? Whatever God says. Okay. Okay, what's going on here, and you'd have to really study the passage, and we don't have time tonight to study the passage, and I don't have the brain power right now to study the passage. But a friend of mine his name is Paul Copan. He's written a book called Is God a Moral Monster? And he deals with all these issues in the Old Testament that seem foreign to us, whether it's polygamy, slavery, killing the Canaanites, these kind of issues, okay? So I'd suggest you get those books. But I will say this. It does say in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 17:17, don't multiply wives. But there may have been instances where God allowed polygamy because if men were dead in warfare, there was no other way for a woman to get a man. He may have allowed it. But check Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster, to go into detail on that.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, folks.
There's one last thing. Not going to keep asking you questions. I do have a lot, but I have a relative that just recently got diagnosed with cancer, and I know it would mean a lot to him if you could maybe impart a few things as far as giving him hope. You know, is there anything?
One thing I would recommend he do right now is get a book that just came out yesterday by my friend John Tesh. John Tesh has just survived terminal cancer. And in fact, Clint and I were listening to the book today. So that might be helpful to him because John has some good advice in there. Now, sometimes you can beat cancer, and sometimes God says no. But you should fight. And John has a very good story that I think would be encouraging to him. All right?
Okay.
All right.
Would you
And
be
pray.
willing to offer him a prayer right now, if that's okay?
What's his name?
Matt.
Is he watching right now?
I don't know if he's watching, but
I'll tell you what. I will pray for him. And his name is
Okay.
Mac or
Matt.
Matt. I will pray for him, but I want to release everybody to leave
Okay.
right now. Okay? Thank you so much. Thanks, folks. Thanks for being here.